it's Richard here again. This is my third instalment of the critical book by Julia Grace Patterson. This is the third chapter called The Method. So as usual, I hope you can hear me, and I'll try to speak clearly because I'm learning things. So hope you're sitting comfortably, so we'll begin. So the method. Assessing what's gone wrong with the NHS goes beyond individuals. It's not just a question of who's to blame, but also what's to blame. We don't appear to have functional mechanisms in our society to hold politicians to account as they take successive steps to break down our public healthcare system. The current problems within the NHS fall into two main categories: problems within the service's structure and function because of the reforms over the past 40 years, and those due to government budget cuts, which are undermining the safe delivery of healthcare. It is useful to separate the issues associated with the service's demise into these two broad categories because it helps to explain why the collapse of the NHS started slowly and now accelerating at breakneck speed. The NHS's structure and the way it functions have changed remarkably over the past 40 years. Successive governments implemented NHS reforms that diminished the responsibility of politicians' roles towards patients, and have increasingly handed that responsibility over to local NHS services. They've also gradually opened the NHS up to external providers, including private companies. These include companies that specialise in dermatology or surgery or even eye tests to the high street opticians and Specsavers. I didn't know that myself. These providers can bid for and win NHS contracts to run public services and take taxpayers' money to do so. All of this has resulted in our public healthcare system becoming progressively fragmented, with a churn of external providers running short-term contracts, which results in different patient experiences across the country and also different experiences over time. Particularly for patients with chronic conditions, this matters. And we get to know one team delivering their healthcare only to find that the local service has changed hands and they're now being managed by different staff. On paper, they're receiving the same care. In reality, they're not. Relationships within healthcare matter. Degradation of staff-patient relationships has an impact. This issue doesn't receive enough attention, but in this way the proliferation of short-term contracts goes beyond the contracts, partnerships and business deals. There have also been various administrative problems. Some patients have explained they have accidentally dropped down a waiting list or off a list altogether in the chaos and bureaucracy of one healthcare system team transferring response to the next. I fell off a list. That's this thing. That's part of the reason. These structural changes, fragmented the service and breaking down relationships, have been going on in the background for several decades now. But while they felt in many ways, small ways previously, it has been the austerity cuts since 2010 that have truly exposed the problems with the NHS reforms. Cuts were made across public services from 2010 in the fallout following the 2007-8 financial crisis. Since the austerity years began, the NHS has felt like a public healthcare system in steady decline. There have been various announcements of increased investment in the NHS, which have been accompanied with great media fanfare and education, but these investments have never matched the funding required in real terms. I had one particularly frustrating conversation in 2019 with a leading journalist at a national newspaper who couldn't understand why EveryDoctor was campaigning for additional funding. He was extremely well informed about UK politics and under the impression that the government had made significant efforts to reinvest in the health service. The NHS becomes more and more expensive to run every year for a variety of reasons. As described by the BBC, average annual UK health spending in real terms rose by more than 4% in the 1960s, 70s and 90s. It went up to 6% in the 2000s. During the 2010s, the Conservative government cut this to 1.6%. We're now in a terrible state, and as the NHS Confederation explained in July 2022, the NHS in England faced a funding hole of between £4 billion and £9.4 billion in real terms in 2022 alone. That's just 1 year. So I talk about 5-6 billion per year by the sound of it. Some of the structural problems with the NHS reforms were masked for a long time because of injections of funding which kept the service running despite the increasing fragmentation of its structure. When the funding was stripped away from 2020 onwards, it revealed some of the worst elements of the reforms. And as budgets were slashed and local healthcare services was forced to cut essential parts of the services, they then took the blame for many of the inevitable failures that ensued. Many of the hospitals that struggled the most are the ones that took on PFI projects often 20 years earlier. Private finance initiative PFIs were schemes whereby the government could borrow money from the private sector in order to pay for the design, build and maintenance of various types of new infrastructure, including roads and hospitals. The money was then paid back with interest over many years to those who financed the work. It was a scheme that frankly was too good to be true, and the politicians were warned about this at the time of the inception of the PFI schemes, which mostly began during Blair's tenure as Prime Minister. Many could foresee the incredible interest payments that would fall on it to NHS trusts, and were worried about the impact this would have on NHS services and their patients. As the New States reported in May 2022, some NHS trusts are paying more on PFI payments than they are on their total annual medicines bill. An analysis of NHS finances during the committee accused the government of trying to create new powers in areas where the police already have access to powers and offences which are perfectly adequate. It is important that people understand what is happening, more important now than at any time in NHS's long history. Politicians have found it too easy to make empty promises. Margaret Thatcher claimed that the NHS is safe in our hands, before creating an internal marketplace within the service. These people are so dishonest. Tony Blair's election manifesto in 1997 claimed that only Labour could save the NHS, and then he proceeded to enable many of the PFI projects that burden the NHS to innate with billions of pounds of debt in repayments every single year. And David Cameron, not to be outdone, declared in his first speech following the general election in 2015 that the NHS will be safe in his hands for every generation to come. And while politicians have evaded proper scrutiny, dismissing concerns and making empty statements, their real work happens behind the scenes. Tucked away from the noise, quietly ensconced in boardrooms, the UK government is getting on with that work, planning its next steps in the dismantlement of the NHS as a publicly funded, publicly run healthcare system, and its reinvention as a corporate machine, funneling increasing amounts of money into the private sector. Boris Johnson recruited Samantha Jones into a senior post in Downing Street in April 2021. She was initially recruited as the Prime Minister's most senior advisor on NHS transformation and social care. Johnson wasn't new to this. She had originally worked as an NHS nurse. Jones, wasn't new to this. She had originally worked as an NHS nurse and had moved into NHS management, working as a chief executive in two separate NHS hospitals trusts. But it is a sidestep into the private healthcare industry that caused a concern. Revolving door. Jones had become the CEO of Centene, the UK arm of the US healthcare giant Operos. Centene, as described by The Guardian, recently became one of the largest primary healthcare providers in England, with 58 practices and more than 500,000 patients. Samantha Jones was promoted in February 2022 to become Number 10's first ever Chief Operating Officer. It remains to be seen what impact this she will have, but even her new job title brings the impression of a business agenda. Her recruitment is certainly not the first time that an individual with experience within the healthcare insurance industry has made their way close to the corridors of UK power. Simon Stevens, who ran NHS England between 2014 and 2021, and previously been the president of the Global Health Division of United Health Group, a giant US private healthcare company. Stevens oversaw the government's 5-year forward view and the sustainability and transformation plans, both of which have been heavily criticised by NHS campaigners for progressing the corporatisation agenda. And Stevens has now become Lord Simon Stevens, elevated in stature to the House of Lords for his efforts. Samantha Jones is not alone in Downing Street. She has been recently joined by someone called Bill Morgan, who is a private healthcare lobbyist with links to a series of controversial clients. The Guardian observed that Morgan had been hired to drive through NHS efficiencies. Oh, dear me. Near the end now. It is the presence or absence of a public outcry that will determine what comes next. The government is making it increasingly clear that what its intentions are. It is closely drawn links with the private healthcare system, which allows the public service to crumble. Our system to hold the government to account are weak, and we cannot rely on the media or our traditional organisations to speak about all the opposition, which is expressing a desire to involve privatisation with its future plans for the NHS too. But interestingly and encouragingly, the public outcry has begun. The most important thing you can do as a campaigner is to listen intently to what other people are saying, gauge the current strength of feeling, the awareness about an issue, which parts people are knowledgeable about, and when the gap in information lie. It's the only way you can formulate an effective campaign. Campaigning after all is about drawing together energy, harnessing it, and flinging it at a cause in the most powerful way possible to yield a result. EveryDoctor began campaigning against the health and care bill during the autumn months of 2021, and at that time the campaign is quite difficult because we had to do a lot of explaining about what was going on, the background and the landscape. Many people weren't aware about the context, the NHS outsourcing into the private sector, the failed private contracts and the questionable links between politicians and the private healthcare sector in the UK. In the campaign, the more time you spend explaining the cause itself, the less time and energy you have to lobby about the actual thing, in this case the bill that was moving through the Parliament. It was tough, and ultimately despite our efforts, the efforts of thousands upon thousands of people speaking up and demanding action from the MP, and all the other organisations working on similar campaigns too, we failed. The bill went through Parliament. It has been enacted. But now, after another 18 months of Westminster scandals, of suggestions of seizure and corruption, the churn of Health Secretary after Health Secretary, amid the chaos of this government, we had 5 now in the past 5 years, something has shifted. The public sees that the NHS isn't being taken care of. It sees that workers are struggling and aren't being supported, that many of them in health and in other sectors are being pushed into going on strike because they've been poorly paid and poorly treated for so long. So there's a backdrop now, a backdrop of discontent, and things are changing rapidly. I hope so. The media, which has not done enough for years to hold this government to account, is finally starting to ask questions. As the NHS reaches the worst state it's ever been in just over the new year 2023, I and many other NHS campaigners were invited onto media platforms, including the BBC, where pertinent questions were asked about the government's behaviour, about our proposals for solutions, about how we got to this point. And there's a sense that there's a tipping point, an opportunity now. When Sajid Javid wrote his piece in the Times declaring that the NHS patients would be charged for things that should be charged for things that the taxes already pay for, there's an outcry like nothing I've ever seen before. It feels like a number of things have amalgamated and have caused the public to stop tolerating this situation. There have been times in the past, many times, when the public has stopped political trajectories and reversed decision making. This can happen when the swell of public anger becomes loud enough. It feels as though the tide is turning on the politicians and the tipping point has been reached for the NHS. So, thank you for listening. I'm sorry it's a bit dry and a bit long, but it's important. And today is the 75th birthday of the NHS, I believe. So, it's getting quite old and it's creaking at the seams, and it's not what it was, sadly. So, thank you for watching. As usual, subscribe and like, those routine, and spread the word. Do that most of all, please. Because I want to spread the word. I want to inform people of what's going on in our society. The actual infrastructure, the systemic stuff, the long-term things, the things that really matter. I want to spread the word. Of course, that's it. Like Brexit, it just wrecks everything if you're not careful. You're not aware of it. It just wrecks everything. Bye.